by
everyone. My name is
Riverside
Marissa,
FM.
My name is Julian. What's up, guys?
and we are both strategic communication graduate students at SUNY Oswego. And today we are here to talk to you about student policy regarding data and privacy.
Yeah, this episode is based around the three P's, and those three P's would be protection, privacy, and policy. So, when taking a look at SUNY Oswego's privacy, protection, and policies, we can determine that there's a clear focus that's established throughout the many different layers of the website. And as a premier public university, ours and their responsibility to do their due diligence with the wide range of students' personal information they receive and have access to. Even with the confidence we have in our university, though, we can't be naive when it comes down to what could be done outside of the digital walls of SUNY Oswego. There's a plethora of students around the world who may very well have their data unprotected because of the lack of protection, privacy, and policies amongst the other colleges that could lead to the dangerous precedents being set in the foreseeable future. So we're going to talk about that with you guys.
So now let's talk about SUNY Oswego's policies regarding student data. I had found a document called the Categories of Information and Data, which is from 2009. Oddly enough, I have not really been able to find too many recent documents on what the school is doing with our data and information, but that's besides the point. We'll get into that a little bit more later. In this document, it shared specific types of information that the school has from their students and what they're able to do with it. So, for example, there's information about students that is collected by the university, which includes, and again, this information is all federally protected under laws such as FERPA, HIPAA, and other various privacy laws. We have our social security numbers, credit card numbers, immunization records, medical counseling records, our grades, our grade point average, class schedule, date of birth, our school pins. We have ethnicity, religion, our parents' tax information, our tax information, criminal records, background checks, and some other information. There's confidential information which isn't protected by law, but the school chooses not to release anyway. Thank you, school. We have advisement records, housing information, athlete information, extracurricular activity information, and letters of recommendation, and surprisingly, driver's license. Lastly, here we have directory information, which the school can legally share with any third party or any other entity that they want. So this includes our names, our addresses, our telephone numbers, our email addresses, ages, place of birth, our photos, our majors, our class years, our dates of attendance, degrees, awards, our expected date of graduation, our participation in activities, sports, and surprisingly, the weight and height of athletes. So, Julian, just looking at all this information that the school can share, the school can't share, the school chooses not to share, did anything surprise you here?
Honestly, I'm looking at it and it almost not surprising, but when you take a look at everything, it's a lot more than people would think. And I personally haven't thought about this kind of stuff or all these things that very well could just be looked up if you look hard enough. So I can't say I'm surprised, but it does put things into perspective. They have a lot more information than we even remember or we even think go out of our way to think about. And I think that leads into more of what SUNY Oswego is doing right now, or what SUNY Oswego has as far as their website. And when I pulled some stuff up from them, uh, there is some things over here saying, know what you're sharing. And, there's a lot of different aspects that come with knowing what you're sharing, and there's a lot of different layers to this website. And I'll share some with you actually. Know what you're sharing. Check the privacy settings on all of your social media accounts. Even include a wizard to walk you through the settings. Always be cautious about what you post publicly. Guard your date of birth and telephone number. These are the key pieces of information used for identity and account verification, and you should not share them publicly. If an online service or site asks you to share this critical information, consider whether it's important enough to even warrant it. Keep your work and personal presence separate. This reduces the potential for SUNY Oswego data to be compromised if your personal account is hacked. Having separate accounts also ensures uninterrupted access to your private email and other services if you switch employers. And then informed consent, something that this whole project and this whole podcast is going to have a clear discussion about. But consent is the practice of fully informing someone of all the risks and benefits associated with participating in specific activity or action, such as being told by a surgeon all the risks and benefits associated with the surgical procedure. Now, obviously, this is something that, yes, we get it in certain aspects online and with our data, but at the same time, they're blocked by hundreds of pages that I don't know if I'm gonna read, but Marissa, I don't know if you're gonna read them, but it's a lot. It's a lot going on. So I think we still could do a better job of concision in that regard.
Of course, of course. And the fact that the school themselves are telling us to be careful with our information, there's multiple different types of students who attend this college as well, right? We have students who live on campus, and we have students who either commute, or we have students who work entirely from home, like you and I do. And we sit here and do our schoolwork on our own Wi-Fi providers. So we know that SUNY Oswego isn't, seeing exactly what websites we're on at home when we're working on Blackboard, or if we're working on Google Docs. But if you're a student at school and let's say you're in your dorm room and you're scrolling on YouTube, somebody could go through the Wi-Fi records at the college and see exactly what you're looking up on YouTube or any other websites. So the fact, I think it's kind of interesting that the school themselves are reminding us to protect ourselves, but at the same time, they are able to look at information, like the example I said, being on campus and utilizing the school Wi-Fi. Um, Regarding all this information that we just spoke about, and like you mentioned, Julian, reading these large, large privacy notices that we got on various websites when we are, have to consent to their private policy. I'm going to be now going over to our interview portion of the podcast, where we will be discussing how students can decipher some of the language that presents itself in these private policy notices that they may find themselves reading. And here I have with me Samantha Lee, a linguistics professional. Samantha, would you mind giving us a little bit of background about your educational and professional experience?
Of course. Hello, I am Samantha Lee. I'm a linguist with a master's degree in forensic linguistics, and I also have a background in federal service as an intelligence specialist. My academic and professional experience is focused mainly on threat assessment, coercive and manipulative language, writing, editing, and disseminating intelligence. I also have a background in generative AI and have worked for private companies on building, maintaining, and evaluating large language models.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So, this is a perfect place for us to have a conversation about students and educational institutions handling their data. So, some of my questions for you, one of them is, do you believe that students should be concerned about how their universities treat and handle their data?
Absolutely. I think that everyone should be concerned about how their data is being used anywhere. We're always told to be mindful of what we put online, and that's true, but there is surely an expectation of privacy whenever we enter our personal information somewhere. Institutions are definitely held to a high standard in that their students' potentially identifiable information, or PII, is kept private, and there are legal repercussions if those standards are not met, or if there is, for example, something like a data breach.
Right, right. And why do you believe that certain phrases or types of language are used in private policy notices regarding personal data? I figured I'd ask you this since you have such a background in linguists and language.
That's a great question. I think that these policies will often use vague or overly complex language, sometimes intentionally, ultimately to kind of obscure the full extent of data collection and sharing practices. So a lot of the time, language can be used as sort of like a legal loophole. So if something bad happens, they'll be able to use their policies language as a way to defend themselves. For example, companies might rely on words like may or might or as needed to avoid making like a firm commitment. And they'll also use passive voice. So, say, like in the phrase, data may be shared, which kind of obscures the responsible agent there.
Right. So they give you almost this strange gray area
Mm-hmm.
within their language. And I appreciate that you sharing that with us today because our overarching discussion is on students and how data is being used in so many different facets, but particularly when it comes to universities and how they treat our private data. In this
Mm-hmm.
episode, we go into how the SUNY system, the State University of New York system, treats student data. And I felt like interviewing you would be very important in terms of understanding how us as students and someone like you who must have been a student not too long ago can look into our school's private policies and see how they're handling our data. So thank you so much today, Samantha, for coming on here and speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.
Take care. Thank you.
Hey guys, so Marissa, as always, and as expected, just had a wonderful interview. But I'm coming to bring it back, reel us back, and bring us back to Earth, and just have a little bit of a conversation about some of our research that we were finding. So we got through a couple different sites, and one of them, ironically, is a really good explanation of less is more. Now, we looked into the data breach response checklist from the US Department of Education. And when we're looking through it, as soon as you get onto that link, you see something in pretty immediate terms. As soon as you go on the website, it shows that it hasn't been updated since June of 2012. And we are in deep into 2025 at this point, almost halfway through, to be honest with you. So we're looking at what, 13 years ago?
Just
And
about.
you mean to tell me that we haven't seen an update from the Department of Education? And to all things considered, the Department of Education is going through a lot right now with the political side of things. But even with that being said, you guys, how it was alarming, it was alarming beyond words, to be
Yeah.
honest, because we are so far removed from the world we lived in 2012 in almost every way, especially technologically speaking. So, how can we bring that prerequisite attention to this topic when the departments that need to be the loudest are the most lackadaisical? And I can't entirely put that on the department itself, but it says a lot about what's going on right now, and there's a clear issue afoot. Now, in more modern terms, at least, we can still take a look at what's going on in the 2020s. A really tumultuous time, but at the same time, a very technologically advanced time. And in Mark Rowan's work on his article, Data Privacy Compliance in Higher Education, there's a clear increase in data usage and storage since the dawn of the 2020s, which we can all agree with. We're halfway through the 2020s somehow, and he speaks about how in 2021, most students in higher education are digital natives or millennials. They grew up around technology, and until recently, advertisers believed this whole generation didn't care or worry about handing out their personal data. In fact, their attitude worried researchers, considering most millennials spend much of their personal and their academic lives online, as per Rowan. And I have to say, that is an interesting take on it because, truth be told, I feel like we are the generation of the internet age, and we got the perfect blend between life before the heavily technologically advanced, and now we are just the ones who were able to really grow up with it. Like, uh, going from the BlackBerry to the iPhone, we were kids.
Yeah.
And by the time we got those iPhones, we were we were cognizant enough to understand it, and it wasn't like a crazy transition. It was more so like, oh, this is new, this is cool. Now you see what babies, I'm talking before they could even breathe a proper sentence right. They are on their iPhones and they're on their tablets and they have this proficiency. And so in turn, we're seeing right now in 2025, not just children, not just us, not just Gen Z, not just millennials, we're seeing even the older people have to adapt as well. So I really did find it interesting how uh, we are seeing this boom period, but how we play our role as Gen Z and being so adjacent to the millennials, how we play such an essential role because it's going to be a time where we are the quote unquote forefathers of this because we were the first ones to really see what it was like before life really started to change. And Rowan goes even further, back to the education side of things, and he quotes, whilst higher education online courses had been growing in popularity over the last decade or so, the coronavirus pandemic forced education almost online almost entirely. As schools are returning to in-person teaching, countless courses and other services will remain online. As a consequence, colleges and universities are more likely to collect more information than students and their parents may be aware of, as per Rowan. Now, Marissa, you and I can both speak to this. Uh we're both coming from SUNY Old Westbury, ironically.
Hmm.
We both come from Long Island, so
Hmm.
we have a lot of commonalities as is. I know for me, I graduated in 2020 in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I really feel all of this. And I remember starting my college career primarily online. And honestly, I didn't touch the old Westbury campus until I believe summer of 2021. And I didn't start going online in person for school until fall of 2021. So I definitely want to hear your take on that and just how not only COVID has played a role, but the online programs and how we've progressed from maybe your first to where we're at today.
I feel like I have an interesting perspective on this because I graduated high school in 2015. So I started college in 2015. So I had, for the most part, that traditional going away college experience. I first went away to the University of Buffalo. So, I was traveling around, I was going to parties, doing things I wasn't supposed to do, but don't worry, I was still doing my studies. Um, but
Felt that.
but I stopped going to college for a while, and I actually decided to go back when the pandemic started because I had been dealing with some medical issues, and I thought to myself, you know what? Instead of going to campus and being in a bit of physical pain, why don't I just go to school remotely? So I'm probably in the very select few of people who decided to go back to school during COVID just because of the insanely endless availability of remote schooling. But if you do bring it back to the corona pandemic and how at that time, and again, colleges have had online courses forever. They just really, ramped up in popularity following the pandemic. But before that, you had never heard of elementary aged kids or middle school aged kids and high school aged kids needing to do their class meetings online. I could never imagine being a 12 or 13-year-old sitting at my dining room table with my siblings around the house and my parents home because of the pandemic and having to focus going to school. But not only that, as a kid, you're not aware of data and policy and protections on the internet. Anytime you see a private policy notice, you're just going to click it as a kid, as most adults do now. But think about the fact that these kids were going to school via Zoom, and we don't know what kind of information was collected on these young kids while they were utilizing Zoom to go to school. Prior to that, that wasn't a thing. So just to sit here and wonder, like, 6-year-old Jimmy, who is in first grade, is their IP address being tracked by Zoom and is being shared? Is their date of birth that their parents entered being tracked or shared? It's a bit of a scary thought. And as somebody who was on the internet as a kid, because I happened to be in that perfect age of getting to experience the internet prior to social media in its full capacity, I could just never ever imagine as a kid dealing with what they deal with today. with the internet and data and just having to constantly wonder who has your information. And again, who knows if any of these kids are even aware of it happening? But that's why we're making this podcast today, to let everybody know about some of the dangers that are involved with data and giving your information to certain institutions and the chances of them doing something possibly nefarious with your information.
I really appreciate the way you took that. You really went in depth on that, and it really puts it into perspective too. Like, you know, coming back to school and just seeing what it was like um, before the COVID pandemic and then after, and then how we've had to adapt. Everyone in every age range has had to adapt to this life-changing event, and it started the decade. So we are just in a completely different realm at this point, and I feel like it's not even mastered yet as far as how we do things technologically on the education side, but also it's still again scary. There are kids that could be really getting their information taken or their parents' information, their family. Everyone is at risk in some way just because of these little microtransactions with our data that we may or may not know about. However, there are some different rules and some more research that I was able to grab in this time frame. And so, of course, I'm sure that, unless I'm mistaken, Vega and Cole had a good bit to say about FERPA. So
Yes.
I won't even go too far into it, but I will say that from the New York State Education Department, there are two more different rules and amendments that we can take a look at that just have something to do with what we got going on. And I found them interesting for what we're talking about to this day. So, which would be Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, which is considered PPRA, and it defines the rules states and school districts must follow when administering tools like surveys, analysis, and evaluations funded by the U.S. Department of Education to students. It requires parental approval to administer any such tools and ensures that school districts have policies in place regarding how the data is collected through tools that can be used. Children Then we also have Children's Online Privacy Protection Rule, which we go by COPPA. And it imposes certain requirements on operators of websites, games, mobile apps, or online services directed to children under 13 years of age, and on operators of other websites or online services that have actual knowledge that they are collecting personal information online from a child under 13 years of age. Now, again, we've had a lot to discuss about our data being possibly upholded without us knowing. And I think it's really important that we take a look at how, not just how this affects us as graduate level college students, how this affects children and how much data can be like just extracted from a kid trying to play on his iPhone or a kid trying to play on his cousin's phone or his aunt's phone or his mom and dad's phone. There's so much, so many little paywalls and so many little things that require data to even get through. And I think that if we just take a look at these and maybe put these in a little with a little more urgency, we bring some urgency to these conversations, I think that we can really keep these kids protected. But with that being said, we are close to the end of our time. And
We are.
I think we have a proper way to tie this all together and really make sense of this. So we'll get to that. So to wrap everything up and to kind of put a nice bow on things, I have to say that even when containing this conversation to the information of college students, the protection, privacy, and policies behind everyone's data, that we should really be looking at how not only it affects the school side of things, the academia of things, but these are things that we could keep applicable to all of data preservation and all of data exploration.
Right.
So much of our data is, yeah, I am so sorry, Marissa, so much of our data is everywhere and it's crazy. Drives me
Exactly.
crazy.
Exactly. It doesn't matter who you're giving your information to. It could be your car insurance company. It could be the store at the mall that's asking for your email for coupons. Our information is absolutely everywhere. And at the end of the day, us as consumers, us as internet users, us as just citizens across every way, shape, or form. We just need to be aware of who we're giving our information to and just be aware of the laws that are in place to protect our information because at the same time, we don't want to be afraid. We don't want to be afraid of sharing our confidential information with places that we need to because somewhere like the healthcare industry, your information is safe there. It's not going anywhere. Nobody is going to be buying your medical diagnosis information and will be dispersing it or doing anything crazy with it. It's safe. There's other lucrative industries though that you never know, where your information's going. If you go on Google and you click on a link and, you don't like the way the link looks, maybe don't accept the cookies. Maybe at that point just get off of the website and go do something else. But it just lends to a bigger conversation. We just need to be careful with what we do with our information. When I was in middle school, they always said to us, if you're going to post on Facebook, be smart about it. And I feel like that goes over into every facet of using any kind of digitized program on a computer. Just be careful.
Couldn't have said it any better, Marissa. To be honest with you, unless they're physical, we say no to cookies. We're
Exactly.
gonna have to do that. And you know what? With Data U, at least we're trying to put we're trying to put our best foot forward, and we're trying to really bring that level of urgency that is needed when it comes down to data, and especially when it comes down to the protection, the privacy, and the policies that come with it. It's stuff that we need to talk about, and these are conversations that we could continue to have. And I'm glad that we had them in this class. I
Me
really am.
too. Me too. Me too. Well, Julian, we had a great discussion today. I felt like everything we shared was super informative and a great way to wrap up this podcast series.
It's been a pleasure, Marissa.
Of course. And until we talk to you guys next time, take care.
Later.